This video is sponsored by Saal Digital. Stay around to the end of the video to see how you for a limited time only can get entire 50% off on any product in their entire catalog. So, editing cannot save a mismanaged photo, but it can enhance a great photo to a super photo. Now, I'm not doing a whole lot of editing videos on my landscape photography channel, so this one here is one of the rare ones. And editing is just so crucial, because no matter if you want to go gung-ho or if you want to edit something that looks like reality, then you will need to edit your photos. So in this video, I'm going to cover a whole range of different editing techniques that I use in Lightroom, CameraRaw, and a little bit in Photoshop. And also stay around to the very end, where I'm going to share 2 bonus tips that are super important that you do with all your photos, no matter how you edit them, before you release them onto the web or you print them. So we are here in CameraRaw. If you're using Lightroom, you can just jump into Lightroom. The interface is more or less the same, and the editing algorithm is exactly the same because Lightroom is built on CameraRaw. So over the past years, Adobe has made some really nice upgrades for us, and one of them is this masking tool. So where we, back in the days, if we wanted to add some contrast and we want to bring down highlights and up the shadows, maybe up some exposure, we were editing the entire photo at once, and maybe that's just not enough for us. So what we can do these days is we can open up the masking tool, and now we can select sky, and we can individually work on the sky. So once it has just found the sky on this photo right here, we can now go down and individually, only on the sky, edit the contrast as an example. Now, the main thing that I found to be super helpful is that even though we can work on the sky, fine, we can simply just go up here on our mask, right click and say duplicate and invert, and then it makes a mask of the ground and resets all our adjustments down here. So now we can also work on the ground for itself. So we can work individually on the sky and individually on the ground, which is just so helpful. So if we jump back up here to our global adjustments, one of the things I always do on all my photos is to go down into optics and use profile correction. It is on by standard in this one here, and I remove chromatic aberration too. Usually I pull the vignetting down a little bit, so usually it comes like this, and then it is adjusted. But I usually pull it down by maybe a third or a half, because it's always good to have some vignetting in your photos, because it's simply just, it doesn't force the eye, but naturally you just go into the middle of the photo. And the most important thing when you're working with vignettes is that you cannot see them. If you can see a vignette, then it's too much vignette. If we go down here into the effects, you can see if I do something like this, you can easily see that there is a vignetting. That is one of the big mistakes I often see from people. So this video is not just like editing techniques, it's also what mistakes to avoid. So it's a whole mesh of really important things to do when you edit your photos. So another thing I often also see is that people complain that the light was flat or they didn't get a good photo because the light wasn't optimal. So if we look at this photo right here, you can maybe recognize it from my portfolio. This day here was so flat because I'm shooting this big waterfall in the storm through a lot of rain. And in all honesty, you can just add contrast. Seriously, just add a whole lot of contrast. Down with the blacks, up with the whites, maybe bring the highlights down a little bit. And let's see something like this. Let's add a little bit more temperature. If you cannot bring the contrast up even more, you can go down into the curves. And then you can start making an S-curve, something like this here. And as you can see, suddenly we have a whole lot of contrast. So if you go down here, toggle to defaults, before and after, suddenly we have a much more dramatic and much more interesting photo. One of the most important things I do with most of my photos to make them pop is to make sure that I have a white point and a black point. So if you hold down Alt and then you start moving the blacks right here, you can actually see that when I pull the blacks all the way here, over to the left, I start to see which one of my colors are getting clipped. So as I just move the slider here, I can see that down here, some of these points start to get clipped. And I can do the same thing with the whites, pull them up here, and I can see they start getting clipped here. Now, in my humble opinion, this here is way too much contrast, and you need to take all photos individually and edit them individually, because you cannot just say that you have to do this, this, and this whenever you edit your photos. But in this particular case here, we can definitely up the blacks a little bit more to make it look a little bit better, and down with the whites to this year's probably looking decently well. It is of course not a finished photo, but the point being, you can definitely add a whole lot of contrast to an otherwise boring photo and make it more interesting. But obviously there's a lot of editing parameters that you need to take into consideration. And speaking of this, I have just updated my big Photoshop for landscape photographers course with additional update videos. So if you haven't enrolled yet and you want to learn even more editing, I have a 30+ videos course all about how I edit my photos from start to finish and all the different tools that I use in both CameraRaw and Photoshop. And I've designed it so it's easy to get started, and then it advances up through the course progressively. And besides sharing techniques, I also share my philosophy about editing, respecting the light, respecting the atmosphere, and what mistakes to avoid. There's a coupon code down in the description of the video if you want to enroll. Good, so speaking of respecting atmosphere, it is super important when you edit your photos that you make sure that when you have a photo with a lot of depth, as in this example here, that the foreground is more contrasty than the background. If we go out into the landscape and look into the distance, everything is just less contrasty, simply just because there's more atmosphere between you and the background than you and the foreground. Very easily. So this here is a good example to illustrate that, because we have the foreground here where I'm standing, very contrasty, and with all these different layers that are further and further away from the camera, it gets less and less contrasty. Here is another example where I've taken a photo out over some forests. One of the things that I often see that people do when they start editing a photo is that they want to balance these tones that are in the photo. So they would make a darkening gradient from the top and all the way down to the bottom. Sometimes it makes sense, but it shouldn't be for the sake of balancing the tones perfectly. So it doesn't make sense that the background, for the sake of preserving details, is as dark as the foreground. Like, our eyes just don't accept it. It looks weird. So yes, we generally want to preserve details in our photos, but we should not compromise on natural light. So another example here is from a waterfall in Iceland, and here we can actually add some atmosphere. And one of the ways I add atmosphere to a photo is simply just dehazing. So we can definitely dehaze the background, as you can see up here. It looks fairly natural, like we can say that like a rain shower or something like that is coming in, but it looks natural because we are dehazing the background, even though it's an effect we are adding, but it is in the background that we are dehazing. So in that way, it makes sense. One of the issues I often find is that when I am photographing a beautiful, vibrant sunset or sunrise where the sun is hitting like the underside of the clouds and everything is just like so vibrant that it's even hard for the camera to capture it, is that when I'm editing the photo, it has a tendency to be very warm. And instead of just making the photo very warm and blowing out all these details that we actually have in these beautiful colors and clouds, what I often do is simply just reduce the temperature of the white balance. Yes, we are changing the colors of the photo quite a lot, so we are getting like another interpretation of the photo. However, we are getting a beautiful color contrast between the warm colors that we have in the clouds and in the background here, and some colder colors that we can have in the foreground and in the shadow. And for the most part, that adds more dynamics to the photo. So it's not all just like a warm wash of colors, but we get both cold and warm colors in the photo. Another thing that is also just super duper important is to clean your photos. So having a photo like this one right here with this beautiful lone tree and this field of wheat right here, we can simply just go into our healing tool, and over the years, again, Adobe has given us some new tools that we can work with. So we have the new Content Aware Remove tool, which simply just removes whatever you don't want in the photo. It's not always perfect, but let's see if it can remove this background tree here and respect the field. It did a decent job if we remove the overlay here, but we still have a little bump here in the field. We can maybe use the healing tool instead, because the healing tool is actually our original tool that we had before both the clone stamp tool and the Content Aware Remove tool was introduced. So we can just move this one up here a little bit. That was too much. And there we go. This looks pretty good. And if we press H, we can just go up here, and we can also remove this dust spot, which is right here. If you're in doubt about whether you have dust spots in your photos, you can go down here to the Visualize Spots tool, and then most of the spots in your photo, dust spots, will be like a little circle like this. So there's one there, and there is one down here. There also seems to be one here, and there's one up here in the corner. So there we go, got rid of all these dust spots. What you can also do is go into the global adjustments, and down here in the details tab, we have a lot of different sharpening options and noise reduction and the new noise reduction. Now, if I zoom in here, one of the things that you would definitely want to benefit from is to use this masking tool. If we hold down Alt and pull it up, you can see where we are applying the sharpening effect. So we are not applying it to the sky now, because as we know with masking, everything that is black, that is where the effect is not applied, and everything that is white is where the effect is applied. So now we can add a little bit of sharpening, and we need to be careful of the radius and the detail. We don't pull those up too much. Now, this new denoise tool is absolutely fantastic. However, I'm using an Intel-based machine, and that means that it is very slow when I'm using this new noise reduction tool, but just try it out. Trust me, it's amazing, and it works much better on some of the newer Apple laptops or computers with the M1 or M2 chips. So here we have a photo of the Hallgrímskirkja in Reykjavik in Iceland. And when you're photographing buildings, but it can also be trees or sea stacks or any other stuff that you're photographing with a wide angle, you can often get a whole lot of distortion. So how I combat this is I go down into the geometry tab, and then I simply just pull this vertical so that we get a better format, so it doesn't look as if the church is like stretched up into the heavens, even though there's some symbolic thing about that. So you may also want to change the aspect just a little bit when you have corrected the vertical, simply just so it doesn't look too squeezed. So here is a couple of other examples. So in this example here, I wanted to include this northern lights above the church. However, I still found it to be very stretched. But when I fix this, then I kind of like lose my northern lights. So what I did was that I made a couple of layers in Photoshop, one with the northern lights and then another where I actually fixed the geometry of the church. And as you can see here, this is the final JPEG. I simply just blended those two photos together. So you can see this is how it originally looked, and this is how you can use Photoshop to use different layers and put it together. Here, another one, it makes sense to just ever so slightly correct this too, because obviously when it is straight lines in nature, we expect those lines to be vertical. Here is a super extreme example. This was taken with my 12 to 24 millimeter at 12 millimeter of these sea stacks in Iceland. And you will really need to pull these all the way up here. And as you can see, it looks a little bit flat. So we will need to really change our aspect here all the way up to 100. And then we can press this called Constrain Crop. so it crops in automatically. We just need to do something like this here, and this corrected it quite decently. If you're not entirely satisfied with how it looks, because obviously we want it to look something like reality, then you may need to go into Photoshop and squeeze it a little bit more. Don't do it for the sake of making it more dramatic. Well, that's totally up to yourself. But you can definitely go into Photoshop and squeeze it a little bit so it looks more like reality. This C-stack out here is obviously also vertical when you're on location, so you may just want to push it in with the liquify tool. So as you can see, I have now jumped into Photoshop, and here's another technique / tip, is to edit your photos, or at least sometimes change to a white background instead of this dark gray. Dark gray is better for the eyes for sure, but sometimes just check your photo how it looks on a white background, because you are often going to put your photos on the wall when you're printing it, and your walls are usually white. So in that way, it's good to check it, and also to see if like you have darkened your photo too much or if it's too dark. You generally want to use the entire histogram, as I just told you about, with the white point and the black point. So you can definitely use it to your advantage to both see the histogram but also check your photo on a white background. Now, if we zoom in here all the way, you can see that this is the photo from before, and I've done some editing in CameraRaw. However, I have also got this not so good white line here. And that usually happens when you lower your highlights and up your shadows, and you do a lot of like sky editing and then some ground editing. And then we can see that the editing algorithms are just not very good at handling that. So how to fix that is simply just go down here in Photoshop, make a new layer, change it to darken blending mode, choose your clone stamp tool over here, and simply just make sure that you sample from current and below. We just sample from out here, hold down Alt, left click, and then we can just paint on top of that white line. It's a little bit cumbersome to do it, but it is something you just have to do. And you can see here before and after. And the reason why you have to do it has something to do with our last step. But first, let's just check out what Saal have for us. So this here is my brand new metal print from Saal Digital, and let's just head over here so we can see it a little bit better. So this here is my brand new metal print from Saal Digital, and you can see just all those delicious details. It's just so sharp. Like, it is really impressive. These metal prints just show all the nice details. You can see up here it was actually damaged in the transport, but they have a really good customer service. So I simply just said that it was damaged in transport, and I got a coupon code to make a new one. Very simple. And if we just let go of this, you can see I now have a collection of 4 of these beautiful professional line photo books with acrylic front. So there's a bit of reflection, but it just looks so good. You can even see the camera in here. And yeah, this is just like so satisfying to look at your old photos. This is my favorite photos 2019. And if we go into them, you can see here they are also just like tack sharp. And it is just so important that you remember to sharpen for print. And I'll show you how to do that in a little moment. But if you want to get entire 50% off, 50% on a book like this, that's several $100s. So absolutely be sure to use the link in the description of this video and get 50% off on either a photo book like this or a metal print or any other kind of print from Saal Digital. So sharpening for print is just super important, because else the print can just end up looking a little bit soft. It also has something to do with the printing lab, the printing method, and so forth. But try to make sure that your photo has a little bit more sharpening added to it. And I'm going to show you here on this example here. If we press Ctrl-Shift-Alt-E and make a stamp of the photo that we have, we go up here to Filter, Other, and choose High Pass. And depending on how many megapixels your photo is, you may want to change the radius a little bit and how much sharpening you want to add to it. Then we're going down to here, the blending mode, and change to overlay. Technically, we haven't really sharpened it. We have just made some micro contrast, so it looks sharper. You can really see the importance of why we wanted to fix this edge before we sharpened it. You can see on the right side here, we don't have the white line, but we have enhanced the white line on the left side of the rock here and over here. And that is something you can definitely see when you print your photos. So make sure that you clean your photos before you make this last step of sharpening for print. So the first bonus tip is to always check your photos on different monitors, because monitors are simply just different, have different colors, different color technology. Right now I'm working on an OLED screen. It is super great. I'm using a Gigabyte Aero laptop. However, it's simply just showing so many colors that you guys out there may not see on your screens. So I may be editing one version of the photo that I think looks good on this screen, but then when you look at it, it looks a little bit off because the colors I can see, you cannot see. That is also why it's important to calibrate your monitors. And I always check my photos on both my iPad to make sure that all the Apple users out there see something that looks acceptable, and I also check it on my phone. And even on my phone, it really enhances the blues, even though I have made sure to remove all those artificial sharpening and color enhancers that my phone comes with. And the second bonus tip is to always convert your photo to sRGB before you uploaded it to the web. So if you're using Adobe Bridge, as I am, you can go up to Tools, Photoshop, Image Processor, and then we can convert our photo to a JPEG file and make sure that that JPEG file is sRGB. You can also, from Photoshop, export the photo as an sRGB. Because if you do not make this conversion and you upload an Adobe RGB file to the web, the colors will definitely start to look muted and weird and funky. And that doesn't matter if it's on a website, if it's on Facebook, or if it is, let's say, on Instagram. So as you can see, it pops up this box here and save it as a JPEG. I can resize the file if I want to, but I need to tick this one here, convert profile to sRGB, and then you can save it wherever you want. Let me know if you're interested in a start to finish editing session here on YouTube. Make sure to enroll in my huge Photoshop for Landscape Photographers post-processing course. Use the coupon code down below. And of course, use the amazing savings that you can get from Saal Digital, also via the link down in the description. As always, I would highly appreciate both a like and a comment. Thanks for watching.